The Glendale Road Church of Christ proudly presents a weekly exploration of the Word of our living God. This is It Is Written with Minister Jason Hart.
Well, if you would, please turn your Bibles over to Psalm chapter 46. A wonderful, wonderful chapter about the refuge that we have in our God. I like to start our lessons with questions, just to get our minds rolling, get our minds thinking along the same track. Where is your sanctuary? The place that you like to go to be able to find peace. The place that you go to find comfort. The place that you go to when you feel weak that you might feel strong. The place where you go to feel safe. Where is your sanctuary? For some of you, your sanctuary is in the garden. For some, it is sitting in front of a computer. Others, it might be out on the golf course or out on the lake fishing. We all have different types of sanctuaries in our lives. Thinking through a few of these myself, I think about the little place that I'll call my courage corner. That's where I have my weights set up. Whenever I go there in early morning hours, I feel strong. My office, that's a sanctuary for me. I feel studious whenever I'm in my office. I didn't say I feel smart, I just said I feel studious. Another sanctuary that I have, home. That's where I feel loved. Vacation, I like vacation. In a sense, that is a sanctuary for me. No matter where it is, it just means that's where I go to for fun. That's fun for me. Camps. I was just involved in a wonderful camp down at Freed Hardeman called Horizons. Had 900 campers there. It is a type of leadership camp. And I'm involved in a couple of those, been involved in a couple of those this summer. And one of the things about those camps that provide a sanctuary, I feel free there. I don't know what it is. I haven't been able to describe it yet, but I feel free. In my car, that is a sanctuary for me. I feel directed. I like driving. I don't care if it's a long distance, short distance, whatever. I enjoy driving. I enjoy being behind the wheel. Jennifer has offered so many times, I can drive if you want me to. No, I like to drive. I'll let her decide whether it's because I really love to drive or I just don't like her driving. Honey, I really love to drive. And church. And I'm not talking about the brick and the mortar. This is the church's building. This building is owned by the church. You are the church. I have a sanctuary right here being in your midst. But in all the sanctuaries I just mentioned to you, Whenever they crumble, I don't find why I go I don't find the reason why I go to those sanctuaries. When things don't work out the way that I want them to in my little courage corner, I don't feel strong. When my car is not working right, I don't feel directed. When my family is not at home, I don't feel the presence of love. I know it's still there, but I don't feel it. When I'm not here and I don't see your smiling faces, I'm not encouraged. For whatever reason, I go to any place that I would consider a sanctuary. If ever it crumbles, I am unable to experience what I expect out of it. And all those little sanctuaries that I just mentioned to you, they are made up of people that sometimes will disappoint. They are made of things that will sometimes disappoint. They are made up of concepts and ideas of men that sometimes disappoint. And so whereas those are nice places for me to go and be involved in, and I know that you have some places that you like to go and find sanctuary, the only sanctuary that is eternal, the only sanctuary that will last, the only sanctuary that will never crumble is our God. He is the only one who protects us. He is the only one who can rescue us. He is the only one that can deliver us. He is the only one that can provide strength that is never fading. Because our God can never be shaken. Our God is always in control, and everything is within His control. And that's the way Psalm chapter 46 begins. It reminds us that we can command our spirits to trust in God. Psalm chapter 46 was very possibly written in a response, in reflection of what God did to deliver Jerusalem out of the hands of Sennacherib. When during the middle of the night an angel came and killed 185,000 soldiers, they woke up in the morning, there were dead bodies around everywhere. And a number of times when you look at the Psalms, that's what the psalmist is doing. He's looking back at something that God has done, and he is commanding his spirit to trust in God based upon what God has done in the past and what God continues to do in the present. Also with the idea of knowing what God will do in the future. Because God never changes. Let's take a look at Psalm chapter 46. Beginning in verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Just listen to the words. Even if the most reliable entities of this earth, even if they were to completely and utterly change, I will not lose my faith in God. Even if the earth should change, even if the mountains fall down into the sea, even if the waters foam from underneath, even if the mountains swell, no matter what catastrophe, no matter what thing that we call a disaster, even if these things happen, God is still there. He will not be moved. Even if there are earthquakes, even if we experience landslides, even if we experience ocean storms and floods and tornadoes and volcanoes, folks, we'll always, always, always experience turmoil. Part of life is being in great battle with the forces of this world. Externally, naturally, even sometimes internally from within. John chapter 16 and verse 33, Jesus said that you will have trials and temptations in this world, but then He says, but I have overcome the world. But listen to what Jesus says. Sometimes I think that we take a look at this passage and we see Jesus saying this. We see Him saying, you will have tribulation in this world, but take heart because I have overcome sin. But that's not what Jesus says, is it? Is sin included in what He means by the world? Yes, I think it does. I think something that's greater is at impact here. Who was it that created the world? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. The world was made through Him. There's nothing that came into being that He did not have His hand upon. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 17 tells us that He holds all things together. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 3 says He upholds the entire world, its entire creation. He upholds it with the word of His power. The world still turns around because of the power of Christ. We still breathe because of the power of Christ. We still live because of the power of Christ. We still walk day by day because of the power of Christ. Everything is within His hands. Remember as a little child, remember what we used to sing? He's got the whole world in His hands. Do we still believe that? Yes, we believe it. Everything is within His hands. So even if the earth changes its complete landscape, even if the mountains fall into the sea, even if the mountains swell like with volcanoes, even if there are storms as a result of the natural events of this world, we can take heart even as we suffer from those responses of nature because Jesus has overcome the world. And yes, you could go deeper than that. Even though the mountains of my faith may fall into the seas of doubt, even as though the oceans of my love for God may foam and roar, God is always my refuge. He is always my strength. And I can find comfort, I can find peace in Him. As verse 1 says once again, God is our refuge. He is our external protecting force. He is our strength. He is that internal strength within us. And it says that, and He is a very present help in times of trouble. A very present help. This also could have been translated another way. It could have been translated, He is found swiftly. He's always accessible. You get on the phone to try and fix something that you bought at the store, to get in touch with technical support, and you'll be on hold for 30 minutes to an hour. There's sometimes that you need something fixed. Maybe you have a car problem and you have to get it into a repairman. You call them up and say, I've got something wrong with my vehicle. Well, can you come in about a week? Maybe you have something problem with the mechanics right here within your body. You call up a doctor and say something's not working right. I need to get some help. They may tell you to come on in, but they may tell you, I can't see you until 2 or 3 weeks from now. I'm thankful for the easy access that we do have to medical care in this nation. A lot of people in this world don't have it. But God is always accessible. As a matter of fact, He is so accessible that whenever we go to Him in prayer, He already knows what we're asking in prayer. He knew it before He even created the world. He is swift to answer our prayers because He has already been working to answer those prayers. God is our refuge. He is our strength, and He is a very present help in trouble. I want you to take a look at verse 6. So even if the most reliable entities of the earth were to crumble, God is still there. Now take a look at verse 6. Even when the nations rage, the kingdoms totter, He utters His voice, and the earth melts. Even when the nations all around the world are warring. Remember what James said in James chapter 4? Whence come fighting and wars among you? Come they not even from the passions that war within? The passions within us come out. And it's in that outward force that wars exist, not just between certain individuals, but can also exist between nations, because nations are made up of people with passions that are warring within them. And the psalmist says right here in verse 6 that the nations are going to war. Even as the nations are warring, God is our refuge. Even as the nations are rising and falling, as they're tottering, God is still our refuge. Even as the nations are in peace, with the word of His mouth, they just melt away. There is tranquility. There is peace. So regardless of the disposition of any place around this globe, God is still the same God. He is still the same God of peace. He is still the same God of refuge. He is still the same God of strength. And He's watching over us. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 21. Daniel notes He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and He sets up kings. Daniel chapter 4 verses 34 and 35. Verse 35 says, this is Nebuchadnezzar making these words. All of the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and He does according to His will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay His hand, none can restrain His hand, or say to Him, what have you done? Job chapter 42 and verse 2 says, no one can thwart the purposes of God. Even as there are wars in economy, even as there are wars in politics, even as there are wars among families, even as there are wars among nations, even as there is peace, and the entire disposition and hearts of men around the world change on a daily basis, God is still God, we are not, and He is our refuge. Look at the promise that is available for you and for me that we see in verses 4 and 5. Listen to the words of this promise. Do you remember the promise of Romans chapter 8 and verse 28? Charles Spurgeon says it is the greatest promise of this life. Now we have a promise of a greater life that is beyond now in heaven, but the greatest promise of this life, and I have to agree, is Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good for those that love God and who are the called according to His purposes. Listen to the words of the psalmist here in verses 4 and 5. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. At the time of writing, God had made available the place of His habitation in the city of Jerusalem. But that was God who chose that location. It wasn't men that chose it. God chose it. God has a different location for His habitation. You know where that is? It's in your heart and it's in my heart. It is to be in our presence as His church. Read Hebrews chapter 12, the last half of the chapter sometime, and listen to the words. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22 tells us we are the city of the living God. We are His habitation. Verse 28 it tells us that is a habitation that cannot be shaken. Therefore, that's the reason why we praise God. That's the reason that we come here and sing songs of praises unto Him, and we study His Word, and we dedicate our lives to Him. Because this cannot be shaken. Isn't it ironic that people don't want to have anything to do with this? They say, oh, I don't need church. Yes, you do need the church, because that is the unshaken, the unmovable presence of God. You cannot have refuge, you cannot have sanctuary, you cannot have peace without the church. Because the church is His city. It is His habitation. That's where you find peace with God. Listen to these words. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will even help her when the morning dawns. When the night is falling, when the tribulations come, when we suffer under the consequences and the pains of sin, God reminds us they're only temporary. They're not here to stay, because the morning will dawn. Eventually, you will wake up to see that God has ensured your victory. All things work together for good. We may not see it in the same way God sees, and therefore we may not see it the right way. But God will ensure the victory. He is our sovereign ruler. He will sustain us. There is no reason for us to fear anything in this life, because God is the one who brings us peace. In a city there is a river that flows throughout, and it branches out to provide comfort. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 3 tells us that our God is the Father of all mercies. He is the beginner of it. He is the authenticator of it. If and when anybody ever shows any mercy, that mercy first began with God. It didn't begin here, it began with God. He is the originator of it. What does it mean for God to be merciful? The mercy of God is that He has such a love and compassion that He hurts whenever we hurt. It's not like the hurt that I have for somebody else that hurts, or that the way that you hurt whenever I hurt. God hurts with an infinite hurt whenever we suffer under the consequences of the sins of this world, even if it is a result of our own sins. God hurts. His desire is to deliver us out of that pain. One of the greatest pictures of God's mercy is found back in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. I love this. God is talking to Moses from the burning bush, and He's coming to tell him how He wants to use him to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. He said, I have seen their affliction. I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. God wasn't telling Moses, I have the facts. I've got my little checklist. He wasn't saying that. God was hurting because His people were hurting. He said, and I have come down to deliver them. It is God's mercy that moves Him and drives Him to save us, to give us peace, to give us comfort, to draw us unto Him. Now, we may not always be willing to answer that, I will tell us, draw near to God and He will draw near to you. But God says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. There is no fear as long as we have God in our midst. Moving along to verses 8 and 9. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how He has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Even as God works through pain, even as there is victory, even as there is peace, God continues to work. Folks, God is never tired. He's never sitting back with His hands off of the works of the world. There are some things that He allows, there are things that He permits, but everything is still within His control. Everything is within His control. Even through all of the challenges and the battles that we experience in our life, God is still at work. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 28 tells us God doesn't tire. He never grows weary. The Bible tells us that His eyes are traveling throughout the entire earth to bring strong support for those who have placed their trust in Him. God is always seeking the best interest of men, even if they refuse His best interest. God is never going to be overthrown by anything of this world. No person, no thing, no creature, no natural event, no nation, nothing will ever be able to overthrow. Nothing can thwart His purposes. And so we listen to the words of verses 10 and 11. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Be still and know. Do you know what He was saying when He said, be still? Just to be silent. Have you ever stood with your toes stretching into the sand while you're on the beach just to behold the beauty of the Lord's creation, and you just can't help but to be silent? Or to stand on the mountaintop and to look at the beautiful foliage, the Appalachian mountain range. Or to be able to be flying high in the sky in an airplane and look out the window and behold the creation below. To think about how small and delicate your life must be, and you can't help but to not speak a word. Or to sit in a crowd of believers, listening to them sing songs of praise. Just to close your eyes and listen to the majestic sound, not from the voices, but what is resonating out of the heart. Be still. Don't be anxious. Don't be filled with worry, stress, and fear. Know that our refuge, our strength, our very present help is God. And He is with us. If that's the type of relationship that you'd like to have with our Creator, please come while we stand and sing.
Holy words,
This has been It Is Written, presented by the Glendale Road Church of Christ. We welcome your visits and communications at any time. With God's own heart, oh, let the ancient words in